Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today I got a fun and interesting episode for you guys this evening, and it's all based upon what you wanted to know about Analogue 3D when I did the first video right before pre-orders went live. So I'm going to be answering your questions and talking about what Analogue 3D could be outside of playing Nintendo 64 cartridges, because there is a potential of this being an amazing new OpenFPGA system, but we're just not quite there yet. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But obviously the pre-order window has come and gone, and I would say Analogue handled it super well this time. Seems like everyone that wanted to order a unit was able to do so, and it seems like scalpers were not able to clear the stock out. So either demand was a little bit flat, or they made a lot more systems than anyone guessed, because everyone I talked to was able to pre-order a system, myself included, and I will do a full teardown and review of that in comparison to MiSTer FPGA when it actually launches. But the number one thing everyone wanted to know when the first video went live, and I totally understand why you're curious, is just what else the Analogue 3D could do, because it has that 220,000 logic element Altera Cyclone 10GX FPGA chip, and people wanted to know how did it compare to MiSTer FPGA, and if this platform, if it was opened up, could technically be something like an adjacent MiSTer FPGA too. So that is what we're going to be talking about today, but we need to go over some baseline information, that way we're all on the same page as to how this actually works. When we talk about MiSTer FPGA, we're really talking about the Thoracic DE10 nano board with that Altera Cyclone 5 SoC FPGA chip on the board. That isn't just an FPGA chip, it also has ARM cores, and whether we're talking about the QM Tech clone, the MiSTer Pi, or a Thoracic original, we're all still talking about the same FPGA chip that's made in the same foundries, that has the exact same capabilities as far as logic elements and everything else is concerned. And obviously 110 is half of 220, so people think, is this twice as powerful? That is kind of the question, because we have MiSTer FPGA at 110,000 logic elements, and that definitely has done a lot for us. And again, we don't have any 4K off MiSTer FPGA, so people were thinking, could Analogue 3D take the MiSTer FPGA cores we have right now, load them up, and have 4K output? And the answer to that question is, of course it is technically possible. It is just up to basically the developers whether or not they want to allow that on Analogue 3D, because OpenFPGA really means that Analogue is allowing other people to work within the hardware. Pretty much all of their other systems are locked down on introduction. Some of them get opened up later on down the line, but it needs to be opened up for that to happen. Now if we take a look at the product table for the Cyclone 10GX series, the top end is that 220,000 logic element unit, and pretty much all the way across the board it is just a higher spec than MiSTer FPGA's chip. That is because it is newer, technology has marched forward, and even though we've gotten a metric crap ton of life out of the Thoracic DE10 with that Cyclone 5 on board, this Cyclone 10GX is just a lot better. It's basically like going from something like a 2080 series GTX card to a 4080 series. Sure, they're both impressive, but one's just going to absolutely eclipse the other one, and that's what we have here. It's got excellent specs all the way across the board, and obviously it is a low price part because Analogue's able to ship these things at $250, and that's not just the FPGA, it's every other bit of silicon, parts, and plastic case and packaging that go along with it. And obviously it does Nintendo 64, and we know so does MiSTer FPGA, and MiSTer can do that all within the 110,000 logic element limit that isn't just for the core, but also drives the scaler and other low-level functions you need to get an image onto your screen. But people are asking, could you run Sega Saturn on Analogue 3D? And the answer to that question would be absolutely on a technical basis. Sega Saturn could be ported to that Altera 10GX chip. It would be totally fine. Now that isn't a free port. Of course there's going to need to be some reconfiguration in code, because even though it is part of the same family of chips from Altera, there's going to be enough differences that it's not like loading up a file from one computer to the other and magically it just works. But as far as the technical capacity of that Cyclone 10GX chip, it has all of the ability to be able to be a Sega Saturn. But the question kind of is, what is Analogue's plan here? I do not think they're going to open up Analogue 3D to OpenFPGA, because I think they have plans to make both a standalone Sega Saturn FPGA console as well as a standalone PlayStation 1 console, and that would make the most sense from a business decision standpoint, because why allow Analogue 3D to be open and basically take your market away from you. Because I'm sure Analogue has plans to release that standalone PS1 and that standalone Sega Saturn and sell them to the market, and honestly, that makes total sense to me, and I would do the same thing if I was Analogue. They are a business, they are in the business of making money and selling you guys things that are quite nice for the price. So OpenFPGA on the Analogue 3D would basically just take that market and fork it. People that could just load up a MiSTer FPGA ported core from some port developer out there would just do that on Analogue 3D, because obviously you have a ton of ports from MiSTer FPGA on the Analogue Pocket. Analogue Pocket is a very different device, even if it is FPGA, because that was always the design of it, to be open to developers, but pretty much all of Analogue's other consoles have never been open from day one, and sometimes they do get opened up later on down the line. But the fact that this new Analogue 3D has that 220,000 logic element chip on it means that it might stay closed until Analogue has all of those other features out. And even if they do open it up, that doesn't mean you're going to get the scaler alongside of it. They could open the chip up to do whatever you want with, but it might not come along with all of the underlying code and features that would be programmed to the FPGA to get the signal out the back. So that kind of is the question, but I totally understand why this is such an appealing thing to people. Now also, just to clarify, because there were some questions, it is 4K out, but they state very specifically in the fine print text that it's scaling to 4K. There are no internal bumps to the resolution or even to the clock speed as far as I can tell. Now on the PlayStation 1 side of things, people are always asking, could the Analogue 3D run the PS1 core? And again, I'm pretty sure that the Analogue 3D could run absolutely everything that MiSTer FPGA does. Sure, you might not get original console controllers because you're not going to have a snack port as far as I can tell. Maybe somebody out there could be creative and allow it to do so, but you could basically run everything that MiSTer FPGA does with any sort of USB controller that would work within the Analogue 3D's hardware. But this is definitely not a small task, and that's what I want most people to take away from this video. Even if Analogue decides to open the system up, it's not like it's going to be a week and suddenly you have a MiSTer FPGA ecosystem with double the logic elements and a lot of other further hardware expansions on that FPGA chip. And again, some things on MiSTer FPGA rely on that SoC with those ARM cores in there, and it doesn't seem like that 10GX chip has any of those cores whatsoever. Just like the Analogue Pocket, there really isn't a traditional CPU on that. It is two FPGA chips. But of course it would still be able to do stuff like this, and I would love to see it in the future, but my guess is going to be that none of these systems, anything that ships on a 220,000 logic element chip, is going to be opened up anytime in the future. And I know people would love to get 4K out of MiSTer FPGA, as would I, as a standalone device. It's been awesome, but honestly there are still ways to do it. So if Analogue just makes the Nintendo 64 a 4K cartridge only playing system, I would understand that from a business standpoint. You do get your 4K out without having to go MiSTer FPGA and a RetroTink 4K. But I guess it'll really just have to wait and see what happens when the system launches, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of intrepid people out there that would love to be able to bring these cores across to something like Analogue 3D. So it's not like it's going to be for a lack of trying that it does or does not happen. It's absolutely going to be a target and a goal for a lot of people that would love to see this thing do something different. So to answer the question, we really need to answer two different disparate questions, and I'll start with the first and easiest one. Is it possible that Analogue 3D opens up to OpenFPGA and you have a 220,000 logic element with a ton of upgrade powerhouse FPGA chip behind it to load up any core? Of course it's absolutely possible. It is just hardware. You can do anything if the motivation is there, and it is allowed. The second question is it likely that this happens? And that's the one where I kind of feel like it isn't really likely, at least not for some years, because outside of the Analogue Pocket supporting OpenFPGA, it again doesn't make any business sense for Analogue to allow this, because they still have other products that I'm sure they're developing and want to sell, and I do support the fact that they should be able to sell whatever it is they feel the market will accept until there is no longer any interest. Then maybe after PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and Sega Saturn, they release that master OpenFPGA console to load up any core that you want on it. Because again, you should just expect Analogue 3D only to ever play original Nintendo 64 cartridges, and if we're lucky, maybe something like the EverDrive 64. Don't purchase this thing, don't expect it to do anything else other than what it's advertised as doing, and you will be happy. I do hope that it happens in the future and it does get opened up, but honestly, I'm just in it to test against MiSTer FPGA, kind of see what Analogue's doing and give you guys some videos. So I would be super happy if the Analogue 3D gets opened up for OpenFPGA, but I never purchase these things expecting anything other than what's on the writing on the box, or in this instance, the writing on the website, and neither should you. Leave me a comment down below and tell me, if it did get opened up, what's the one core you'd love to see come across. By short of that, we're done. I'll do some more updates when the hardware comes in. Bye bye.